Text: this story is not a legend. It is not a sailor's myth passed down through rumor. The ship you are about to hear about existed, sailed, and was officially recorded in royal archives. The Flor de la Mar was a Portuguese carrack built in the early 1500s and used by the Portuguese Empire during its expansion into Asia. Its name appears in ship registries, royal correspondence, and contemporary maritime chronicles. In 1511, after the Portuguese capture of Malacca, the Flor de la Mar was loaded with an extraordinary cargo. According to historical records and royal inventories, the ship carried vast quantities of gold, precious stones, tribute from conquered territories, and items intended for the Portuguese crown. This was not private treasure. It was imperial wealth. Text: the ship never delivered its cargo. On its return voyage, the Flor de la Mar was caught in a storm near the coast of Sumatra and sank. The wreck was never recovered. No confirmed remains of the ship have ever been found. Multiple attempts were made to locate it. None succeeded. The loss was documented at the highest levels of the Portuguese state. The treasure was written off, but never forgotten. Before we continue, let me say this briefly. If you are interested in real, documented treasure stories like this, calm, factual explorations of wealth that vanished from history, consider subscribing to the channel. This project is still growing, and reaching the first 1,000 subscribers is an important milestone for me. Your support truly helps. Text: if this story captures your interest, a like and a comment also make a real difference. Now, let's go back to the ship itself, because to understand why the Flor de la Mar carried so much treasure, we need to understand why it was never meant to survive the journey in the first place. Long before its final voyage, the Flor de la Mar had a reputation, and it was not a good one. According to contemporary maritime chronicles and later historical analysis, the ship was large, heavy, and difficult to handle. Built in the early 1500s, it was designed to carry enormous cargo loads across long distances, but its size came with serious limitations. The Flor de la Mar was slow. It sat deep in the water, and it responded poorly in rough seas. These weaknesses were known. Text: records indicate that the ship had already suffered damage on earlier voyages. Repairs were made, but concerns remained. Experienced sailors reportedly warned that the vessel was not suitable for carrying extreme weight, especially on routes exposed to storms and shallow coastal waters. Despite this, the decision was made to load it heavily. The reason was simple. After the capture of Malacca in 1511, Portuguese officials faced a logistical problem. The seized wealth needed to be transported back to Europe, and quickly. Delay meant risk, political risk, military risk, and the risk of theft. The Flor de la Mar was available. It was large, and it could carry everything at once. According to royal correspondence from the period, speed of transfer mattered more than caution. Text: the treasure represented power, legitimacy, and proof of conquest. Getting it to Portugal was a priority. So the ship was loaded far beyond what sailors considered safe. Gold, jewels, ceremonial objects, tribute intended for the crown. The Flor de la Mar was transformed from a warship and transport vessel into a floating treasury. This decision sealed its fate. When the ship left Malacca, it was already compromised, not by the sea, but by human calculation. It did not sink because treasure was dangerous. It sank because urgency outweighed restraint, and once it entered open water, there was no way to reverse that decision. The Flor de la Mar left Malacca under conditions that were already unfavorable. Text according to contemporary maritime accounts, the return route toward India and onward to Portugal required navigating waters known for unpredictable weather, strong currents, and shallow coastal zones. For a ship already overloaded, this was a dangerous path. The season mattered. So did timing. Historical records suggest that storms in the region were common, sudden, and difficult to anticipate with the navigational knowledge of the early 16th century. Ships relied on experience, not forecasts. As the Flor de la Mar moved along the coast of Sumatra, weather conditions worsened. Winds strengthened. Seas grew rough. Visibility dropped. For a lighter vessel, this would have been challenging. For the Flor de la Mar, heavy with treasure and already compromised, it became critical. Text according to later reconstructions of the event, the ship struggled to maneuver. Its deep draft made it vulnerable near reefs and sandbanks. Steering became sluggish. Every wave placed additional stress on a hull never meant to carry so much weight. Then came the storm. Counts describe violent conditions that pushed the ship toward the coastline. Attempts were made to regain control, but the vessel could not respond quickly enough. The Flor de la Mar struck submerged obstacles near the shore. Damage was immediate. Water flooded the hull. The weight of the cargo worked against any chance of recovery. What might have been survivable under lighter conditions became catastrophic. The ship broke apart. Some crew members survived by reaching the shore. The treasure did not. Text according to surviving accounts, the cargo sank quickly, pulled down by its own mass. Gold, jewels, and imperial tribute disappeared beneath the water, scattered and unrecoverable. The loss was total. What survived was the knowledge of what had been lost, recorded, reported, and carried forward in official correspondence. The Flor de la Mar was gone, and with it, one of the greatest treasure shipments ever assembled. The loss of the Flor de la Mar was devastating not because a ship had sunk, but because of what it carried. According to royal inventories, correspondence, and later historical summaries, the cargo aboard the Flor de la Mar represented one of the richest single shipments ever assembled by the Portuguese Empire. This was not ordinary trade. Text: the ship carried gold taken as tribute, precious stones seized after the fall of Malacca, ceremonial objects intended for the Portuguese crown, and items meant to demonstrate imperial dominance to Europe. Gold formed the foundation of the cargo, but it was not alone. Historical records suggest the presence of worked gold objects, uncut and cut gemstones, luxury items collected from royal treasuries, symbolic gifts meant for King Manuel I of Portugal. These were objects that did not simply hold monetary value. They carried political meaning. The capture of Malacca was a major strategic victory. The treasure taken from the city was meant to prove the success of Portuguese expansion in Asia and justified the enormous costs of overseas campaigns. Text: sending that wealth back to Portugal was not optional. It was essential. This is why the Flor de la Mar was overloaded despite warnings. The cargo was considered too important to divide among multiple ships. Concentrating it in one place reduced administrative complexity, even if it increased physical risk. According to later historical assessments, This decision magnified the scale of the loss. When the ship sank, the empire did not lose a portion of its prize. It lost nearly all of it at once. The treasure was never officially recovered. No confirmed salvage took place in the years immediately following the wreck. Reports of attempts exist, but none produced verifiable results. What remains today are descriptions, written evidence of what was loaded, what was expected, and what never arrived. The Flor de la Mar did not simply sink with gold. It sank with an imperial moment that was never completed. The treasure of the Flor de la Mar did not disappear quietly. Almost immediately after the ship was lost, attempts were made to recover what had sunk with it. According to historical correspondence and later maritime accounts, survivors of the wreck provided rough descriptions of where the ship had gone down. The location was believed to be near the coast of Sumatra, not far from land. In theory, this should have made recovery possible. In reality, it did not. Early 16th century salvage technology was extremely limited. Divers had no reliable equipment, no underwater breathing systems, and no accurate methods to locate wrecks beneath shifting sediment. Gold sinks quickly. Heavy objects embed themselves. Storms move debris. By the time organized recovery could even be considered, the wreck site had already changed. Contemporary sources indicate that local rulers and Portuguese officials discussed salvage efforts, but results were minimal. Any items recovered were small and unverified. No official record confirms the retrieval of significant portions of the treasure. Several factors worked against recovery. The sea conditions in the region were harsh. Currents were strong and unpredictable. Visibility underwater was poor. Most importantly, the cargo itself was scattered. When the ship broke apart, its contents did not remain in a single, accessible mass. Gold and objects would have spread across the seabed, sinking into sand and coral. According to later historical analysis, this scattering made systematic recovery nearly impossible, even if the general area was known. As time passed, attention shifted elsewhere. The Portuguese Empire continued to expand. New conquests brought new wealth. The loss of the Flor de la Mar remained painful, but it was no longer urgent. The treasure slipped from immediate concern into historical memory, still documented, still acknowledged, but increasingly out of reach. One of the most important reasons the Flor de la Mar has never been recovered is simple, but often overlooked. No one ever recorded its exact resting place. According to historical sources, navigation in the early 16th century relied on experience, landmarks, and estimation rather than precise measurement. Longitude could not be accurately calculated at sea, and coastal navigation depended heavily on visual reference. When the Flor de la Mar went down, its crew was fighting survival, not documentation. Survivors reached shore under chaotic conditions. Storms were still active. The coastline was unfamiliar. Any description of the wreck's location was approximate at best. Contemporary reports refer only to a general area near the northern coast of Sumatra. No coordinates were recorded because none could be reliably produced. Over time, this lack of precision became critical. Coastal geography changes. Sandbanks shift. Reefs grow and break apart. Sediment slowly buries what lies beneath it. Even if later searchers were in roughly the correct region, they were effectively searching blind. According to later maritime historians, The Flor de la Mar likely broke apart quickly after sinking. Wooden hull sections would have deteriorated. Heavy cargo would have sunk deep into the seabed. Unlike later shipwrecks, there was no single, intact structure left to identify. What remained was dispersed weight. Gold does not float. It settles, and once settled, it becomes part of the seabed. Centuries later, this created another problem. Modern searches rely on detecting anomalies, shapes, metal concentrations, or recognizable wreck outlines. The Flor de la Mar offers none of these easily. Text: its treasure is valuable, but it is also quiet. It does not announce itself. Without a precise historical location, every search becomes speculation, and speculation without confirmation leads nowhere. This is why the Flor de la Mar is not just a lost ship. It is a ship that disappeared before anyone knew exactly where to look. As technology advanced, interest in the Flor de la Mar returned. By the 20th century, shipwreck recovery had become a serious field. Sonar, underwater exploration, and deep-sea diving opened possibilities that earlier generations could not imagine. And yet, the Flor de la Mar remained untouched. According to modern maritime research and documented search efforts, several expeditions have attempted to locate the wreck in the waters near Sumatra. Text: none produced verifiable results. The reasons are not mysterious. The search area is vast, the seabed is complex, and the wreck does not present a clear target. Unlike iron-hulled ships, a wooden carrack from the early 1500s leaves little behind after centuries underwater. What remains would be scattered, fragmented, and buried under layers of sediment. Gold itself complicates the search. It does not create large, recognizable shapes. It does not float. It does not remain neatly contained. According to underwater archaeologists, even if modern equipment passes directly over part of the treasure, it may not register clearly. Small concentrations of gold buried under sand can look like natural anomalies rather than artifacts. There is also the matter of access. Text: the region where the Flor de la Mar is believed to have sunk lies in politically and environmentally sensitive waters. Permits, legal restrictions, and international agreements limit large-scale exploration. This is not a place where unrestricted searching is possible. As a result, modern efforts have been cautious, fragmented, and inconclusive. No confirmed wreck, no verified artifacts, no recovered treasure tied definitively to the ship. The Flor de la Mar remains one of the few cases where increased technology has not reduced uncertainty. In some ways, it has made the loss more complete, because now we know how difficult recovery truly is. Over time, the Flor de la Mar became more than a lost ship. It became a symbol. Text: according to historical interpretations, the loss of the Flor de la Mar came to represent a specific moment in the history of the Portuguese Empire, a moment when ambition exceeded restraint. The empire continued to expand after 1511. New territories were claimed, new wealth flowed into Europe, but the treasure lost with the Flor de la Mar was never replaced in quite the same way. It stood apart. Unlike other shipwrecks, this loss was acknowledged immediately and recorded carefully. Royal correspondence did not minimize it. It documented it plainly, as a failure with consequences. This honesty gave the story longevity. Historians continued to reference the ship not because of rumor, but because of documentation. Text The Flor de la Mar remained present in records long after the empire itself began to decline. As centuries passed, the Portuguese Empire fragmented, power shifted, trade routes changed. The ship, however, remained fixed in historical memory. It represented the risks of concentrating wealth, the limits of maritime power, the fragility of even the strongest empires. According to later historians, the Flor de la Mar illustrates a pattern repeated throughout history. When power moves too quickly, losses are amplified. The ship was not cursed. It was overburdened. Its fate was not mysterious. It was calculated. And because of that, the treasure it carried gained meaning beyond its material value. Text It became a reminder that some losses are permanent, not because they are impossible to reverse, but because the moment to reverse them passes quietly. The Flor de la Mar did not vanish from history. It settled into it. The treasure lost with a Flor de la Mar is often described as one of the greatest in history, but that claim is not based on imagination. It is based on comparison. According to historical estimates and royal inventories, few shipwrecks before or after carried such a concentrated load of high-value material in a single voyage. Most treasure losses were spread across multiple ships, years, or routes. The Flor de la Mar was different. Text Its cargo represented wealth accumulated through conquest, tribute gathered from an entire region, symbolic objects meant to legitimize imperial power. This concentration is what makes it exceptional. When the ship sank, an entire chapter of imperial ambition disappeared with it. Unlike later treasure ships, whose losses were insured, documented in detail, and partially recovered, the Flor de la Mar left behind only descriptions, not manifests that could be reconciled against recovered items. There was no accounting closure. What was lost remained lost. Historians also note another important distinction. Many famous shipwreck treasures involve private investors or colonial administrators acting independently. The Flor de la Mar's cargo, by contrast, was directly tied to the crown. Text It was not personal wealth. It was state wealth. That distinction elevated the loss from financial to political. The treasure mattered not just because it was valuable, but because it was meant to prove something: success, dominance, legitimacy. Instead, it proved vulnerability. This is why the Flor de la Mar continues to appear in serious historical discussions rather than folklore collections. It is not remembered because people hope to find it. It is remembered because it was officially acknowledged and officially never recovered. The absence itself became part of the historical record. After the initial attempts and later modern expeditions failed to locate the Flor de la Mar, something subtle happened. The search did not officially end. It simply stopped being urgent. Text According to historical patterns, this is how many great losses settle into permanence, not through a final declaration, but through gradual silence. Centuries passed. Empires changed. Priorities shifted. The Portuguese Empire itself declined, fragmented, and eventually disappeared as a global power. The political reason to recover the treasure vanished with it. Without that reason, the shipwreck became a historical problem rather than a practical one. Researchers continued to reference the Flor de la Mar in academic work. Maritime historians analyzed its construction. Economists discussed the scale of the loss. But the question of recovery faded into the background, not because it was impossible, but because it no longer mattered in the same way. The ocean does not return what it takes simply because enough time has passed. And history does not always demand resolution. At some point, the Flor de la Mar crossed an invisible line. It stopped being a missing object and became a fixed absence. The treasure was no longer something to be retrieved. It became something that defined a moment, a decision, a risk and its consequence. The Flor de la Mar carried more than gold. It carried expectation that wealth could be concentrated safely, that urgency justified risk, that power could control chance. None of those expectations survived the voyage. What remains today is not a wreck we can visit or a treasure we can count. What remains is a record, a ship that existed, a cargo that was documented, a loss that was acknowledged and never corrected. This is why the Flor de la Mar still matters, not because it might be found one day, but because it shows how easily certainty can disappear beneath the surface. If you appreciate calm, factual stories about real treasures that history never recovered, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps this project grow, and reaching the first 1,000 subscribers is an important milestone for me. And before you go, consider this question: when something valuable is lost beyond recovery, does it still belong to history, or does it belong to the sea forever?